the input that you gave at the meeting last time, and also as a result of the sort of quote unquote straw poll survey that the team put together and sent out. So just as a quick look at the agenda here today, we'll do a public comment. I believe there are members of the public who would like to make a statement. Team will spend some time walking through the results of the straw poll, and then we'll spend some time looking at the model that resulted from that straw poll. Senator Harrison, I know they're super busy down the hill. Senator Harrison has some language in the Capitol bill that is relevant to what we are doing here. And we invited her to come and join us, but if she's not available to do that, I will orient us to that language so folks know what it is. And then in a subsequent meeting, we can speak to Senator Harrison and ask her any questions. Is there anything anybody wants to add to the agenda at this point? All right, sounds good. Meeting minutes were included, so if there are any concerns about those, please go ahead and communicate them to the team. And we will get started. So Danny, you said we had a couple folks signed up for public comment this morning?
Yeah, the first to sign up was Paige Kalita. I think she's on the call.
All right, Paige, welcome back.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
I can. Actually, right before you get going, Danny, how many folks are in fact signed up?
We have 2 total.
Okay. Paige, if you wouldn't mind keeping your comments to 2.5 minutes, I'd appreciate that.
All right. You want me to go?
Yeah, please. Thank you. You're welcome.
Okay. All right. So first, I want to thank you all for the important work you're doing to try and bring some common sense and some equity to the approach in protecting our lakes. If you recall from my previous testimony, I live in a 3-acre site in Richmond. This area consists of the Southview neighborhood, which has 85 homes, but also connects directly to Hidden Pines, which is directly uphill of us, and that has approximately 40 homes. Only 48 of these homes within Southview were drawn into a 3-acre site. The rest of the homes have no responsibility, financially, legally, or emotionally, for a stormwater permit or managing this challenging issue. I testified at an earlier meeting about the challenges we've faced and the unfairness of placing this burden on a small number of Vermonters. But more importantly, that the effort to reduce phosphorus really needs to be an all-in approach that is built around getting the best squeeze out of the lemon, rather than an approach that is forced upon properties where the state has enforcement ability through stormwater permits or other avenues. Impervious surface is the same, whether it's a neighborhood, a hotel, a seasonal camp on the lake, parking lot, and maybe even a solar farm. We should be putting the best management practices in where we can get the best bang for our buck, not picking random sites that may or may not have a phosphorus runoff problem. On a funny side note, when we started this process, we were originally told that pools were considered impervious surfaces because they had covers on them part of the year. I'm coming to you today with an update to our 3-acre permit and a new alarming issue that has come up as we navigate this process. Since I last testified with you, the 48 households in my neighborhood that are subject to the 3-acre rule were able to come to an agreement with the town of Richmond. If you recall, we do not have an HOA or other entity that could be on the permit, and forming one had its own challenges and would be unlikely to succeed because we had no way to force people to join. This would have put the burden on paying for this and managing it on only the households willing to join a legal entity. Our agreement with the town is that they will be the sole permittee and they can bill us for our portion of the impervious surface within the 3-acre site via a special tax assessment district. Each household will pay 1/48 of the cost that is on private land. The town pays the cost for the impervious surface on the town-owned land. This split is approximately 64% private and 36% town. The estimated cost at this time is $600,000. This is a rough estimate, and this calculates out to a cost of just under $8,000 per household. This is not great news, but we are honestly happy to be able to put this challenging and stressful process behind us and move on. Over the past few months, we've received updates from the town manager, Josh Arneson, via the engineering work on our permit. Something came to our attention recently that has us extremely worried. We learned that the A&R has little tolerance for adding any impervious surface once the permit is finalized. What this means is that if someone wants to add on to their home, as long as they can legally obtain a building permit that satisfies setbacks, etc., if they want to add a garden shed, a deck, a screened-in porch, a small addition, maybe a ramp to their home for a daughter who suffered an accident, who's now a quadriplegic, and I'm telling you this because it's happened to my dear neighbor. Their daughter crashed on her mountain bike and is now a quadriplegic. They added a small bedroom on the end of their home with a ramp. And in this case, they would have had to get permission from the town to do that, even though they had the legal right to. To be blunt, this just felt like a kick in the stomach. I'm honestly so fed up with this process. We're expected to spend $600,000, $8,000 per household, to put in a stormwater system that is basically based exclusively on theoretical data. No on-site studies have indicated that there's any kind of meaningful phosphorus that can be removed from our site. It's within an arbitrarily drawn border. And then if someone wants to add a garden shed, we have to re-engineer the permit. To say this is government overreach is a mild statement. This has felt like this all along, but coming after we, and I say mostly me, have done all the work to move this process along has me steaming mad. I'm sorry. We asked if we could build in a small buffer to account for future impervious surface, and to best that I can understand, the answer is no. You should have in your materials from today a PDF with the email correspondence about this issue. I could read it to you, but I don't want to spend my time on that because I found the response very difficult to understand, but it seems like there's a maximum cumulative amount of impervious we can add. So again, the A&R is grouping us together as an entity when we have no legal connection to each other. So if a neighbor or several neighbors add impervious, once that threshold is met, then no more impervious can be added without re-engineering this permit. I'd encourage you to read the response we received from the state. I asked for this to be included for you today to see if you can understand it, because I really cannot. Basically, it comes across to me as skirting around the question and not answering it because they know we don't like the answer. It also brings up questions to me if new development is subject to this scrutiny. If homes are being built in a neighborhood, does this mean that they can never add on? What if someone wants to add an accessible entrance for a grandparent or a child that suffered an accident? Or if they can't afford to add a deck to their new home but want to in 5 to 10 years, can they do it? And in closing, I've read a lot over the past few months about Act 181, and I understand the legislature is in the process of repealing part of it due to very similar issues around property rights. In this case, the A&R wants to regulate what I can do on my own private property using a stormwater permit that only covers a portion of my neighborhood. 48 of the 85 homes will have this oversight regarding any impervious surface, and 37 homes will not. This will affect our property values because we have to live under this scrutiny and they do not. I feel that the 3-acre site rule has very similar issues to Act 181, and I hope you will suggest a repeal or a regional utility that ensures equity and treatment that actually addresses the problem. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Paige. I appreciate hearing that. I've been plugged into the email correspondence back and forth, and appreciate that you sent it to the committee. I don't think I'm going to ask folks from my team to respond right now, but can let you know that if clarifications are needed on what was sent your guys' way, I am sure Mr. Purcell, who's in the room, would be happy to simplify for you. Did we have anyone else to comment today? I thought you said 2.
Yeah, there's one other person, Caitlin Filkins. I don't see them in the meeting.
Okay. All right. Well, Paige, thank you again. Appreciate you reaching out to us. And if you care to stick around and listen a little bit, you'll see the direction that may be the direction the committee likes to take. We're getting to that point of formulating it right now. So, and you're most welcome to stay if you'd like.
I'll
Okay.
listen as long as I can. I'm at work, but thank you all for all this hard work. We
Sure.
really do appreciate your looking at this. Thank you.
And
And I just
understand.
I just thought this was like a whole nother like spin on it that you might
Yeah.
want to know about.
Yeah,
So,
no, I
thank you.
appreciate that. It's not necessarily the exact, role of the committee, but nonetheless, the members hearing the stresses that are out there on the regulated entities and on the citizens of Vermont, that's definitely worthwhile. So we appreciate it.
Great. Thanks.
All right. Gianna, who is going to walk through the results? Danny, you?
Yeah, I'll walk through those, and I'll try to keep it brief so we can focus on the narrative 5 that's also in the materials packet. So the first question asking whether or not the final report should include a single utility model with draft legislative language, or should include multiple models. The majority consensus was to explore more than one model. And the way that we interpret this as impacting the final report is that the final report could have a section where it explains the current state of, or the status quo, and which would be part of the introduction. And then the report would have one model that is very detailed and has some accompanying language that would need to be had. And to get at the multiple models, we're proposing that there's in the remaining chapters that there are different options to be chose from for permitting structure and revenue raising, that a la carte phrasing that we've mentioned before. And as always, there'll be a section of the report for dissenting opinions. Neil, I don't know how you would like to go through this. If you want me to run through all of the results right now, or pause after each one.
Well, I saw Catherine's hand pop up right as you were finishing on number 1. So maybe we should go ahead and take questions after each section just to, to allow people to have their questions top of mind. So Catherine, go ahead.
Sure, and I'm happy to wait until the end if that's your preference, but it directly relates to this question.
Yeah, no, go ahead.
So if 6 of the 8 members, and the consensus is that the report should explore more than one model, why is the implication that only one model will be in detail? Can you help me square that a bit?
I can offer the first response based on having seen sort of the full materials, is that this sort of scenario 5 that we'll talk about at the end is kind of the most median expression of what everybody around the committee believes we should be chasing down and articulating for the General Assembly. And I'm not sure whether we would do well to fully articulate multiple models and multiple legislative bits of language, right? Multiple legislative constructs in our final report. I think I'd rather the idea that we articulate what we think our model is that we will develop for legislative development, legislative language, which is what we'll get to at the bottom of this packet of material. But then also articulate the other models that folks feel strongly about that also represent more than, one person's singular opinion, and what the pros and cons are of that, but not develop out the whole language that would be associated with it. Gianna, go ahead.
I think you spoke a lot to that, Neil, and maybe the other component that the team was wrestling with is just our timeline. And when we think about a model being the entity type, the permitting structure, the revenue, there's some sort of exclusionary factors of which types of entities match which revenue models and which permitting types. And so like filling those gaps and making a model that would functionally, logically work together and that the committee is comfortable building is taking time, as we're all seeing. So doing that holistically more than once, along with all the legislative proposed changes that would be needed for that, was a concern about feasibility. And rather so, like Neil said, if we can do one well and still have like these a la cartes, but not necessarily build them together. So we still have like all these other partial models or partial options, the building blocks of entity type of this and that. We felt it sort of struck a balance between what might be feasible with an interest in articulating lots of options.
We got a hand
Jenny has her hand up in the room.
Go ahead, Jenny.
So thank you, Neil. Thank you, Danny. And I think Neil, you and John have basically said this, but I think there's multiple ways of parsing the responses to the straw poll. And if you look at the detail, there were 2 people who said the report should include a single utility model. And then in addition, there were 3 people who said that it should include no more than 2 options, with the implication that one would be more detailed and the other would be something for consideration. So I was one of those 3. I do agree that it makes sense to take the approach of focusing our attention, because we do have such a limited time period.
Thank you.
So,
Go ahead, Christine.
Chair, thank you. I'm one of the 2, and I'm just going to share why I went with the way that I went. Mostly because giving the legislators more options, I don't think is really going to help them. They're really looking to us to provide a recommendation. And so providing multiple options just seems like we're going to volley it back to them. And I think that's a disservice. So that's why I voted for 1.
Mm-hmm. That's fair. And I just want to say my own experience interacting in the building is, sometimes it is more effective to provide one well thought out framework with language as opposed to multiple. But I do think that our report should also explore the pros and cons of the other sort of generalized consensus approaches that we've talked about. And it looks like Carrie is having a hard time entering the virtual room. So hopefully she makes it in. Anyway, do you want to keep going, Danny, on to number 2? Hey, there you are. Good afternoon, Carrie. Welcome.
Yeah, so question number 2 was looking at whether the stormwater utility should be allowed to pursue offset opportunities in natural resource sectors. So the majority consensus was that that is either a low priority or not a priority at all. And with the implications for the model that the committee will put together, it'll be to have the initial focus on developed lands and include the opportunity to scale to other sectors over time. And then it'll also provide more context on the challenges of the TMDL and the reasoning to focus on developed lands. And I'll pause there for any questions or comments.
Great. Questions from the committee? Okay. Go ahead, Danny.
And then, what was that, Neil? Sorry.
I said, go ahead, keep going.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, thank you. So then question 3 was asking whether you support adding a local or regional revenue raising mechanism to help pay for the needed stormwater improvements. So the majority acknowledged the appropriateness of enabling a local revenue raising mechanism to complement state funding. This isn't to say that the answers were in full support of implementing a new fee, but just recognizing that it might be appropriate in this scenario. So the Model 5 will include a local revenue raising mechanism in tandem with the state level funding. And then any questions or comments?
I might jump in and just sort of offer that, I think creating a model of a new fee may be a little bit difficult at the statewide level. It may be slightly more palatable at the local level, but either way, I think that may create challenges. It doesn't mean we should not recommend it and explore it and detail it out in our report back to the General Assembly. But, the reality of it is that. Danny?
Yeah, thank you, Neil. Thank you, Danny. I agree. I mean, and I think that my answer to this question was a little bit tempered as well, similar to what Neil just said, is I support the idea of empowering regional entities to establish fees based on the values of the services that they're providing, similar to what we heard from the Colorado entity, but a broad new additional fee, I think that would not be a good recommendation.
Yeah. We have another hand in the room, Neil.
Yeah, I see Christine.
Thank you. I'm just going to go back to one of the stats that I shared earlier, that of the 251 cities and towns and 60 villages across Vermont, only 43 operate municipal water and sewer. And so when you talk about it being an easier lift at a local level, I want to state that, put those stats back out there as a reminder that most local communities are not set up for billing. So it in my opinion, would not be necessarily an easy lift or easier to do it at the local level. Thank you.
Okay, I think that actually gets to the next question that Danny's going to roll through right now, question 4, but your comment would be relevant there too. And there was a pretty wide perspective on that. Do you want to go through it, Danny?
Yeah, so this question was asking what you believe is the best billing and collecting dynamic, whether the municipality should have a role or if it should come directly from the utility. And the majority was to support the opportunity for municipal participation. And I believe some of the answers were that the municipality should have the option to do it, but wasn't mandatory. And the implications for the models 5 that was put together was to outline how the municipalities could play a role in streamlining the billing process.
So Christine, back to you. This is to my mind, this is, I think, what you were more referencing. Am I right or not?
No, I think that, my response to this was that it should be optional, right? Because I know there's local communities that have systems set up, that have utilities already set up. They want to retain those. Other communities we've heard from want to explore the option to establish a utility, especially ones that might have multiple, if we were to go to the regional level, might have multiple overlapping regions within their community, their municipality. So there's some varying opinions on that. So I think having the option, and level of participation is really most important. That went back to what I said earlier with the statistics there. Those communities which don't have any billing systems currently in place, I would imagine most of them would probably elect not to set something up, but I could be wrong.
I think I'll offer. Yeah. Go ahead, Jenny. Go ahead.
Yes, thank you, Neil. I think Christine and I were in pretty much in agreement in terms of what we said on this one, that having an approach where both options are available, and it would really depend on the willingness or capacity of municipalities in the region to take on the billing functionality, as well as the type of regional entity in the particular region. So if you have a municipality that is open, that does have that capability, it certainly might be more efficient than having new regional entity or an existing regional entity take on that new capability. But at the same time, in those communities that Christine's describing, that really don't have that capability, you wouldn't want to force it on them.
Right. Yeah, I'll offer what I was going to say earlier, but the thing that was so interesting to me about the Colorado scenario was that the municipalities themselves actually had the billing relationship with the landowners, and that, there was basically the underlying presumption was that the landowner was less likely to stiff arm the municipality when they were collecting their tax bill as they might be to stiff arm a standalone utility that was sending them a standalone bill, creating a narrative or a scenario where the utility would spend a lot of its time chasing non-compliant billing around as opposed to doing the stormwater work. But I think it's absolutely something we should explore as part of that section of the report on revenue raising and on the mechanisms, the actual mechanics of moving dollars should new fees be raised. Gianna, you had your hand up there for a minute.
I think you spoke to it, Neil, of exploring how the existing tax bill can be used as a vehicle and what restrictions or abilities are on there to collect fees on a tax mechanism, billing mechanism. So I think more to explore there.
Sure. Christine, is that hand up? Yeah.
It is. Thank you. Thank you. Just one last comment to that. It's the rain tax if you put it on a tax bill. And I really would like to not see that fight happen again, but if that's the direction the committee wants to go, just keep that in mind. You put it on a tax bill, it's going to get called a rain tax, and you're going to have a lot of very upset individuals, I believe, from past experiences setting up utilities. I even heard today from town manager that we still have 2 individuals that write it on their utilities or on their bills, rain tax. So just how does it land, right?
Yep.
With the community members.
I hear you, and there's definitely a thematic right now about that. So Paige even spoke to it at the end of her comments. So, all righty. Not last question. Question number 5.
Yeah, so this was asking whether the participation in a regional utility should be mandatory or voluntary. Majority consensus was to have it be mandatory. You'll notice that the numbers in the results don't add up to 8. That's because the 2 bottom bullets were members that said that it should be mandatory, but just gave an extra description to it. So I wanted to put that in the results. But overall, it was that participation should be mandatory. So Model 5 will contemplate local revenue participation as mandatory for all. 3-acre sites can opt in and or out of receiving funding and services from the regional entity, with the assumption that most will opt in. And it's required for the utility to adopt the 3-acre sites that want to opt in.
Okay. Thoughts on that?
Yep, Jenny has her hand up.
Yep. Go ahead.
It was really helpful to look at the model because I think it was hard to answer this question because there's a lot of nuances to mandatory for whom and on what basis. So I think it'll be an interesting discussion with when we talk about the Model 5 narrative. I think that DEC did a good job of kind of trying to parse out the different levels of mandatory.
Catherine?
Can you speak to the question Paige raised earlier in the public comment about expansions to impervious and how that might function if this was a mandatory participation and the regional utility was required to adopt the opt-in places?
I personally am not sure I can. I don't know, Terry, if you feel like you're able to answer that, or would that kind of question need to think before you get into it?
I'll just say that expansions to whether it's a permitted site or in some cases an unpermitted site, if it's a regulatory expansion, would be the responsibility of the permit holder. So unless there was another mechanism that was put into the regulations to address regional utilities and what their responsibilities would be, under the current framework, the permittee, the permit holder, is responsible for any regulatory expansions on that site. So if that answers the question.
So let me read that back to you and see if that answers your question, Catherine. So you are a regional entity, you're a regional stormwater utility, and you have a neighborhood, and you are holding the permit for that neighborhood. And you are managing the stormwater for that neighborhood. That neighborhood somebody in that neighborhood wishes to add impervious somewhere, right? So that would mean a permit amendment. And that permit amendment would flow to the regional entity because the regional entity was holding the permit. Yes? Did
So
I get
that
that
means
right?
the regional, so if that's correct, that means the regional entity would need to establish a framework for accepting, managing, denying, or approving expansions to impervious within these sites that they adopt, which is an entirely additional, I don't know why I'm echoing,
Either.
which is an entirely other framework that would need to be created in addition to everything else, something that doesn't exist right now, if I'm understanding that correctly. So I think that's something we haven't talked about before. And it raises a lot of questions that we can put on the back burner, but are definitely there.
Catherine, I think those are not back burner issues. Once we start developing it out, I think those are issues to place front and center, because I think you're right. Like any permit holder who's going to do an expansion would need to permit that expansion right now. And any new impervious over a half acre would be subject to permit. That wasn't previously. So
I meant
just the
back
law's
burner
expansion.
for this agenda item.
Exactly. No, I agree with you. I agree with you. But it's not a back burner issue in the overall
No.
context. Yeah.
No, and I'm really glad that the public comment aligned with this so that it raised this question for me.
Terry, anything to correct on that? Like, did I misspeak, or did I get that about right?
No, you didn't misspeak. I would just add that, currently MS4s do take over operational permits, and in some cases, and when they do so, there can be the opportunity for that private development, for example, to obtain a permit for an expansion separately. It doesn't have to always be going right into the MS4. So I'm just saying there are mechanisms to consider how that could be managed under a regional utility approach.
Yeah. Jenny, go ahead.
I want to make sure we address the echo. Is there still an echo? I did have a comment too.
Yeah.
I wonder if there's somebody who has their microphone on. So there's two microphones.
I think the echo's coming from the room.
It is, yeah, okay. I mean, Neil, I agree with what you said, that this is an issue. I think this is an issue that the model should address, because I think what the commenter spoke to is another example of kind of a way that the 3-acre model could be improved in terms of equity, and that the idea of including a situation that's not just about 3-acre compliance, but that goes to the issue of potential expansion as a way that a regional entity could help incorporate additional lands in a way that would increase the fairness of the system. I think that we should think about ways that we could include that.
Okay. Let's keep going to question 6. Last question in the straw poll.
Yeah, so this was a question that was presented by a committee member. And as such, DEC is deferring to the committee members on any takeaways and how these results should be reflected in the final report and model. We did include a brief summary of the results, but didn't include a implications on the Model 5 or final report.
Danny, do you want to walk us through like the responses on the target structure for regionalization?
Yeah, I was gonna.
Christine has her hand up.
Yeah, I see that.
Yep, Neil, thank you. I was just gonna kind of go that same path, just communicate to the committee, that I'm one of the respondents that believes this should be watershed or statewide utility. That being based on the fact that the state already has watershed management plans in place. There's a lot of research and resources. There's technical knowledge. There's a lot of reasons to really go in that direction. That's my reasoning for wanting to go that direction, and I look forward to hearing others' opinions on other paths forward and why they think that might be the best.
Yeah, Jenny.
So I can speak to what I was thinking in my comment on this. I agree that watershed is optimal. I think the reason that I talked about the idea of hybrid options or a potential pilot would be to deal with the situation where there are a number of municipalities that are within a single watershed, but that their watershed also, for example, might include MS4 communities that wouldn't have to get rolled into whatever they want to accomplish. So I think having the watershed basis makes a lot of sense. I just would be concerned about having it be so mandatory that it creates a situation of potential unwillingness or inequity between different communities within that watershed.
If I may, I agree, and I would be in support of that. I think that, I would be in support of that watershed base, but then still allowing local utilities or MS4s, or if somebody wants to establish a local utility, because there are some benefits to that, and the communities that have those local relationships and really know their local areas. I wouldn't want to say no, but they should have something in place, right? Whether you're opting into a local or you're opting into the watershed base or the state, however it gets structured. But I just don't want to, I would not be in support of pushing this back down to all the local communities, having 250 stormwater utilities. That would.
And I agree with you on that too.
Right. Well, I think what we'll talk about later on in Senator Harrison's language is it is intended to preserve the ability of a municipality to create their own utility if they want to, basically irrespective of what we do, which is kind of what the language says. And we'll cover it again later, but that is the gist of it. I'll just voice my support for a watershed-based model, the reason being that you can align allocations to the watershed. And if the general consensus is to help solve the 3-acre problem by sticking within the developed land sector, we know what those allocations look like at a watershed basis. All that math is done. You don't have to transect a community, or you don't have to reassign stormwater across different sectors of the TMDL, different lake segments, when you're using a watershed framework. But it's interesting to me that this was, so wide, it was such a wide perspective on it. So let's see if there are any other voices. So we've gone through kind of the straw poll answers, and before we walk through the model itself, do other members of the committee just have some thoughts they want to share one way or another? Brian, please go ahead.
Yeah, I think just in light of what's happened with 181, I think maybe we should do a really stripped down option as one underdeveloped option where the RPCs get state money for technical assistance. The legislator looks to see that individual larger towns can do utilities that are effective, and that's it.
Okay. Thank you. Anything else? Carrie, go ahead.
First of all, I want to thank everyone for their hard work on this. It's a tough issue, especially in this particular statewide budgetary climate. So I appreciate everyone thinking about best options and efficiencies. I was one of those that was thinking more of a statewide, and partly it was because you could actually structure statewide in various ways with flat fees and then incrementally adjust from a flat fee to something more impervious cover based, where you have the data in more urbanized areas. And so I do appreciate Neil's comment about having the data on the watershed scale. I just didn't know administratively if we're really have in place or could have in place a regulatory mechanism to implement something like that, a jurisdictional mechanism, other than the regional planning commissions. And so that would be an ongoing discussion there and what that could look like. I'm still, as a representative for small communities, I'm really sensitive to the impacts, financial impacts on small communities. And especially, when you look at, and I haven't looked at these data for quite some time, but as I understood, there are small communities with 3-acre permit requirements. There are both on public and private lands within those smaller communities. So not everyone is in a larger, one of our Vermont scale larger communities. I get that. But I also understand points that were made with smaller communities having part-time administrative capacity, whether they could take on something like this, but most importantly, the financial burden it could place on residents in those smaller communities. I want to be sensitive to that. I think it's why I've continued to think about how we can be more efficient with our existing mechanisms. Are there ways we can streamline what we currently have to create the right incentives towards expanding our existing municipal stormwater utilities to become regional? And similar to how the Clean Water Fund has an incentive for establishing a municipal stormwater utility, municipalities receive some financial benefit. I wonder to the extent to which we can expand that incentive to help support the expansion of the existing stormwater utilities that take on that kind of partnership with other communities that are either adjacent or at least within the same watershed or much of within the same watershed. Municipalities have access to, as you know, to clean water state revolving funds. Those are below market loans. They're not grants, obviously, but the country has always looked to relying on a loan-based program to pay for some regulatory programs when they apply to municipalities, whether they're discharge in particular, if they're resulting in some sort of a stormwater or wastewater discharge in particular. And I know the state of Vermont has been very creative in the use of the state revolving funds. Another further incentive could be how to marry together a municipal partnership with these, and where the municipality would be the loan recipient, but in partnership with those public and private entities within their jurisdiction that has these 3-acre permits in front of them. And so it would be, again, the incentive would be some clean water funds to help support that access to and the municipality being the applicant to access some of that loan money for this purpose. So I guess I've just been trying to brainstorm some incentive-based programs to expand and really experiment with it. We don't have to. This is new territory for us, new territory for the country. The example we heard earlier was again addressing MS4 needs. And so this is, in many cases, a great opportunity for us to experiment and see what works through kind of an incentive-based program. Finally, I want to think about when we think about the how we use clean water funds today to address the TMDL needs, that we all I think are aware that TMDL is to reach the objectives, the load reduction objectives. It requires a total reduction of discharges, what we call waste load allocations, plus total reductions across non-point sources, we call load allocations, plus a margin of safety. And I'm very interested to know, and I know we have part of that TMDL is meeting our margin of safety needs, and the reason for that is that it recognizes that water running off the landscape and our accountability of our pollution reductions is not a perfect science. And so we need that margin of safety to meet our objectives. But have we met that? And so if we have, and if there's any wiggle room there, perhaps we can use some of that surplus funds that we're going to meeting our marginal safety to again add to this incentive. So I'm trying to be creative using either a combination of existing funding or ways to use these incentives to address our needs. So I raise that as an opportunity to kind of look at that. And I had one other point. Well, it'll probably come to me. But thanks for this. Thanks for the great work. And I think in this manner, this way, we can, in partnership with the municipalities and our regional planning commissions and the public that are subject to this, I recognize we're all driving on these roads, we're all parking in these parking lots, and there are our waters that we want to restore or keep clean. But how can we just be a little bit more directive in how we use our existing funds wisely? Oh, I had final. I just remembered.
All right, go ahead.
So, as we know, in particularly this past year, I'm from a small town, Waitsfield, of 1,700 people, and we just passed a local option tax and joining some. Gosh, I think there's something on the order of less than 50 maybe, but many more towns have adopted this because small towns have really lost its capacity to use the property tax to fund their aging infrastructure needs and other infrastructure needs. And so this has, at least from our town perspective, this is why with a falling down town garage and a fire station that's hurting and et cetera, we needed to pass something like this. The towns can retain now, it used to be 70% of the local option taxes, it's now up to 75%. Part of that for a one-time, as I understand, for 1 year, part of that surplus, we have more than we need to address our pilot, which is the compensating towns that have existing non-taxable state properties within their municipal jurisdiction, and the state compensates that with using pilot payment in lieu of fees. And I've heard we're above the necessary amount to meet pilot costs statewide. And part of that surplus is being used to address through Vermont Transportation Agency for 1 year to address some municipal needs. Well, I'm a huge proponent of trying to have towns retain more than 75%. They should be at 90%. But we're not there yet. But perhaps another recommendation would be, knowing that we're all driving on our roads, we're all parking in these parking lots, how can we use some of that surplus for a short period of time that's sunsetted to help address some, adding to this, the pot of money we need for incentives that can help address these incentive-based programs that can further the expansion of stormwater utilities on a regional basis to address these needs.
All right. Well, thank you. There was a number of points. I'm going to take Chair's privilege to amplify a couple of them. You spoke to, access to the state revolving loan fund, and that's literally one of our charges is how to create a mechanism where a utility can access SRF money. And I think about the, per parcel cost of, of building one of these systems as Paige outlined before. And then, that's a big hit to a family. If that were dollars that were actually borrowed from the SRF with some subsidy and very low rate, that could turn into a very small quarterly payment on the tax bill from the landowner to the municipality or the regional entity who is borrowing from SRF. So when we talk about that, how do we get the revenue in? I think we need to think about it not just from the perspective of getting some fee money from some owner in order to build the widget right there, but actually more like gets a fee money that would be used to service debt and then make that debt really cheap. And that creates the incentive carry that I think you're talking about, which I think is really compelling and creative. And then you also spoke about, looking carefully at the allocations, margin of safety. And I think the margin of safety is not something we actually invest in. It's more like it's capacity that we never allocated out. It's out there, so we can't tap into it. However, I think if we think about this from a regional perspective, we should be looking carefully at how much phosphorus we're trying to get out of 3-acre properties on a by watershed basis, because in some instances, it's not very big. And that's really where we can think about where there's higher value nutrient reduction targets that may live in the gaps between regulated stormwater and the load allocation. And I'm really intrigued by that idea too. I have some ideas, but I don't want to, we'll bring them up kind of as we're developing out the report over our subsequent meetings, but I do have some things that we could think about in there. So that's really interesting. And then chips and tips and all that, and and local options tax. I mean, they're definitely good mechanisms. Anybody else have thoughts on Carrie's? Carrie had a lot of interesting things there, and I hope Danny and team, you caught them, because they'll be good adds to the report.
And the one thing I also mentioned up front is that, just didn't want to lose sight of this, is that part of that incentive could be with the existing Clean Water Fund paying towards an incentive for the expansion of municipal to regional. So, and start small and learn from that, and see where we can go from there. Especially for those municipalities that are dealing with both the MS4 and 3-acre permit issues. And then finally, I just don't want to lose sight of that, is that you can structure a stormwater utility with different types of fees, flat fee, for example, exemptions. I kind of, and I'm happy to share this. I've been jotting down a different type of structure of what that stormwater utility could fee based on land use. And it contains a number of exemptions, exempting farms, for example, unless they are generating stormwater that are unregulated from, you exempt timberlands, because you're really focused on the, the particular stormwater liabilities that we're addressing. But
Right.
so you're focusing that, but you're creating different tiers within residential versus non-residential, so that you're creating a more equity-based approach. So I jotted down some ideas, and I'll forward that on to you after this meeting,
Okay.
so we can include it in our materials.
Yeah, well, please, yeah, if you share it with Gianna and Danny, they'll definitely get it to everybody. So that's great. I see the room put its hand up, which suggests to me someone in the room has their hand up. Jenny, is that you?
I put my hand up. I just want to say, Carrie, I think your ideas are great. And I love your overarching concept that we want to be creating financial incentives rather than mandates wherever we can and as creatively as we can. So I would definitely like to see the committee explore those options.
So, yeah, go ahead, Zach.
So I just also wanted to mention that right now in the grant and aid program, there's like 259 communities, and 230 of those communities are participating and leveraging those dollars for improvements on their roadways. And so there is some framework already that exists that when you make it easy for people to get and to use those dollars, that they are actually utilizing those programs. Some of the communities out there, like South Burlington, that are not participating. But I don't want to lose sight of that program and the benefits that that structure is working for municipal roads.
Yep. Catherine, did you want to say something about that?
I did. First of all, I wanted to remind everybody that Carrie was the architect of that fabulous idea.
She
And that
absolutely was. Truly
together with
built it.
our RPC, we built the whole program and it was super fun. So I think it's a great example because it's simple, it's clear, it's accessible, and it again begs the question that we should always be asking ourselves as to whether we can build more in programs like that to offset some of the complications we create with the 3-acre permit. And I say that, I'm going to find an occasion to say that at every meeting. And I found
No, that's good. Well, I'm gonna, after Catherine, just fair flag to let everybody know that Catherine and I spoke a little bit in advance, because the model that you read about and that we'll walk through in a minute kind of points at RPCs. And so I did not want that to land in front of the committee without having spoken to Catherine about it first. And Catherine, you had some really cogent, articulate thoughts about that, which I hope you'll go ahead and bring up, like when we get done walking through it, if you want to. So Danny, do you want to go ahead and turn to the kind of model document itself?
Yeah, I'm going to turn that over to Mary to go over.
Oh, great. Okay, Mary, great. Take it away.
Do you want it? Would you mind sharing your screen,
Yeah.
Danny? Or
I can
maybe
do that.
everybody has it up already, but might be helpful for the people online. Okay, Model 5. So this is a model that pulls from the scenarios 1, 2, 3, 4, and takes some of the discussion we had about those models, and it also, you know, strongly considers the results of the straw poll. So we're trying to find a model that has a basis in a, agreement, but it's also just like we spoke about at the beginning of the straw poll. It's one option that has some support. It doesn't need to be the only option or the only ways. Like there can be other building blocks that we include in the report. So this model takes sort of like how scenario 4 was set up with these different categories. So we start with entity type information, permitting dynamics, revenue, services, offsets, and then end with sort of like how the program will be scaled up. So I'm just gonna take a few minutes to summarize the main points from each of those sections. But we can spend more time on anything as a part of the discussion if there's if we want to dive into more details. But I'm not just going to read through the report because you can all do that on your own. So yeah,
That's good.
entity type.
Mary, I'm just gonna kind of pop in and say, let's go ahead and let you go through all 5 of the components, and then we'll do questions.
Okay, sounds good, Neil. So yeah, the entity type information, we're proposing in Model 5 to do a watershed scale and pick an existing entity that has experience with stormwater management and that has a relationship with municipalities so that a billing structure between municipality and the entity could be established. So based on those criteria, we selected the regional planning commissions as the tentative model, and you'll see in the meeting packet, there's some information on how we reached that decision about the different types of entities that we can use. So yeah, these entities would require some changes to statute for an RPC to become an entity like this. So that needs to be further explored. Moving to permitting dynamics, there's sort of 3 main ways that the entity would resume permitting responsibility. The first would be the change to allow the RPC to secure the permit and become responsible for the permit. The second would be getting a plan for, or yeah, sort of accounting for the phosphorus reduction that's associated with all the sites that they adopt. And then the third is creating a plan and a management scope to address those reductions. So we're imagining that the permits would originally stay with the landowners, and the regional entity would have the ability to adopt the sites. So any landowner that's interested in having their site adopted could put their site up, the regional entity would adopt, and that those phosphorus reductions would become the responsibility of the entity. So moving to revenue, this is, like we spoke about in the straw poll, this proposes a combined effort between state funding and local revenue raising. So there would be a formula established through rule that would fund the entities through the clean water budget, and any amount that was needed in addition to those state formula grants would be raised at the local level. And so that would sort of be the entry point for the regional entity and the municipality to negotiate and form a partnership around what fee is needed to meet the level of service required and get the number of reductions needed, and also to split how the service is delivered between the municipality and the regional entity. So there's some blending in the revenue section and the service for utility section, because we wanted to allow a municipality to retain a portion of the fee if there's an existing municipal utility that wants to continue and wants to provide some of the required services. As we also spoke about this, the local fee could be used as collateral for the state revolving loan funds, and that could be another revenue source for the entity. And then, yeah, so services of the utility, the services would be managing all the 3-acre sites that have elected to be adopted by the utility. And there would be a partnership between the municipality and the entity for how much kind of what work the utility wants, an existing utility would want to do, and what work would want to be passed along to the regional entity. And we would just have developed lands as for the project types that the utility is servicing. And that would include like technical assistance, design and construction work, operations and maintenance for the sites. For part of adopting the 3-acre sites is finding offsets for sites that are not feasible. We would want to make sure that the offset opportunities are limited to the places that are where implementation on the site is not feasible or exorbitantly not cost effective. So those would be eligible within the developed lands category. And then any site that the entity finds as an offset would become part of the regulatory framework that the entity is operating under with the 3-acre rule. So I think that's that section. Yeah, and then moving to the phasing scaling, this would obviously not happen overnight. They would start with a sort of startup phase where we would make necessary changes to statute, like allowing the entity to accept responsibility for permitting and phosphorus reductions, and developing relationships with the municipalities, developing a fee, of how the billing would work and how much the municipality wants to continue to service and how much they want to pass to the entity. So then after that startup phase is complete and there's relationships have been established, there would be phase 1, which would open up the entity to adopt all the 3-acre sites. So it'd be sort of limited to the 3-acre permits. And then beyond that, there would be once that has been addressed, there'd be opportunity to grow into other sectors, project types, or adopting other permits. And I'll stop there.
All right. Thank you. Lots to be considering in there, but I hope that as members, you read this, you saw it as a fair expression of kind of like the central mode or the central mean of all the comments and all the responses that came in from the straw poll. And if you are agreeing with me that looks something like that, then I'm going to notch that as a minor success, since we've been discussing a lot of different options, and here now is on paper something that I think may represent an expression of what the committee is thinking at this time. So that's not nothing. So let's open the floor up to thoughts and comments.
We have a hand in the room.
Yep, go ahead, Zach.
I just have one question, and maybe you guys know the answer to it. Do we know why the grant aid program left RPCs and went to VTrans to begin with? I'll just leave it at that.
Well, Catherine, would you like someone from the state to take a crack at that, or would you like to say anything?
I'll simply say it wasn't an RPC decision and allow you your choice to answer after that.
Yeah, I think that the Agency of Transportation and the Agency of Natural Resources had leadership level consultation and determined that it would be more efficiently managed out of local roads program under Joel Perigo's shop than to be decentralized. I take no value judgment on that one way or another. It was a decision at the leadership levels of both agencies. You know what's nice, Carrie and Catherine, as I look at you two both on the screen, we're all smiling about it. Okay.
It was cheaper because they took away all the technical assistance as part of it. It's really the,
And then, yeah.
I just, when we're looking at this, if we're putting it back to RPCs, are we just setting ourselves up to move back in the same direction later where V-Trans then has to take it over? Or I didn't know the history of the context. That's why I was asking the question to begin with.
Well, I mean, you know, the local roads program has always been an entity that existed in V-Trans aligned with their mission. Managing private land stormwater is not really part of V-Trans's mission. And so while the local roads model is an interesting model to assist municipalities, to assist landowners, V-Trans as an entity wouldn't have an interest in kind of what we're doing here and now.
I do think it raises a good global question, which is to ensure that if any movement forward is made on any sort of less than state model, that there be strong consensus that this is a long-term solution so that we don't invest in building a structure that then is abandoned years later.
Do you want to expand on that? I mean, that kind of opens the door into the sorts of things that you and I chatted about a little bit about the other day. I'll give you the floor if you want it, Catherine.
Yeah, and I'm really curious to hear other people's opinions. So all I'll say is that that I understand from the analysis that this makes sense in terms of the RPCs being the regional entity, but I can't say that the RPCs endorse this plan because this is just the beginnings of a conversation. And so that's all I really want to add at this point. So I'm super curious what others think.
Fair. Thanks. Christine.
Couple of things. Zach, thanks for raising that question. I have similar concerns. I'd like to see something more long-term. Anyways, question though is why was the choice for regional planning commissions and not necessarily clean water service providers?
Yeah, that's a good question. And so Gianna, do you want to go ahead and take that?
Yeah, I think when we did a summary of the different entities, there's a couple that operate at the watershed scale. We have the clean water service providers. Because they're a range of sort of formal entities, including the Housing and Conservation Board and a Natural Resource Conservation District, not all of them have the same municipal relationship and billing dynamic. And so certainly they're an option and they would be one included in the report either way. But the reason we ceremoniously popped RPCs on there was the existing, I think there's like a annual fee or something that already exists between the member municipalities. It's very small to my understanding, and Catherine could probably speak more to it, but there's already an exchange of funds between and the structure of the RPCs having municipal representation on a lot of those boards and in decision making. It's sort of already presented as that dynamic, whereas clean water service providers, they do have a Basin Water Quality Council, but municipalities are only two heads on that council. And so trying to like marry the municipal relationship with the entity, that was some of the reasoning.
Okay, no, that makes sense. Appreciate that. Follow-up question to that then. One of the concerns I have is you identified there's all these different entities that are in different scales that are functioning as clean water service providers. I just don't need an answer, but I put it out to the committee as a whole. Any opportunities to consolidate some of all of those activities, and we have so many bodies doing so much work. It's everywhere, and this isn't really efficient and the best use of our money. Could we get more done through consolidation? Don't need to answer that, but something to think about. My actual question, though, following that is under the permitting dynamics, section C, it says developing regional stormwater management plans. That just kind of seems a little bit redundant to what the state's already doing as far as like some of the watershed plans that are out there. The state seems to have taken a big lift in identifying what kind of water quality issues exist in each different watershed, and that does get renewed every 5 years. And so I raised that up as a question of, is that being redundant to current efforts? And that kind of ties back to my previous comment about, can we start to consolidate some of our efforts across the state?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a great piece to bring up, Christine. The three pieces under the permitting section, A, B, and C, are what it's kind of pulled directly from the Act 37 of what they'd like to see the report articulate, an entity developing a regional stormwater plan. But I think we could definitely speak to how, like, is a regional stormwater plan one of those inputs to a tactical basin plan as it relates to developed lands? And so there's not a redundancy of effort or a partnership there in terms of, are they already tactical basin planning partners? And can their plan be like part and parcel of a larger watershed plan? So certainly things to expand upon if we're diving deeper into this model.
Well, let me sort of articulate a thought, which is we are doing what we're charged to do, and we're doing a nice job of it. And as we go through this, it's becoming mutually clear to all of us just how complicated and complex the space is. And we can move forward and will move forward and develop out this model. If you all say this is the direction we should go, the team will do it. Like, as you look at it sort of dispassionately, starkly, okay, this is what we're going to recommend to the General Assembly, that we're going to build this widget out. We would be building this widget out for 1,500 kilos of phosphorus reduction out of 217,000 kilo reduction necessary. So speaking in kilos as opposed to metric tons, right? But so it kind of gets to, is the juice worth the squeeze? So I think we owe it to the General Assembly to develop out a regional framework, whether the best optimized regional framework constitutes the recommendation that the committee makes in order to achieve the 3-acre reductions and associated sort of available offsets and so forth. Whether it is worth the lift is something that we should analyze and present as part of the report as well. And then if it's not, then we owe it to the General Assembly to contemplate alternatives that get those reductions and that meet some of the challenges that Vermonters subject to this are bringing forward. Go ahead, Jenny.
So I think that's a really interesting question, Neil. And I think part of answering it would be saying, could we set up a mechanism that would result in moving funds towards the most cost-effective reductions, thereby magnifying beyond the 1.5 kilos, and that would kind of leverage a greater good. I don't know if that is true or possible or not, but that could be a reason that it would be worthwhile, even if it's a small percentage of the reductions.
Well, it's an underlying intent of the charge, right? Are there other alternative ways to achieve the reductions that are assigned to 3-acre in a more cost-effective way? That is definitely part of it. So, and I'm not trying to poo-poo anything. This represents a really nice expression. I really do believe this represents a nice expression of what people are kind of seeing as what a regional utility could look like. And if we build it just simply to achieve the 3-acre piece, those reductions might not be quite worth the squeeze. If we do it in order to assist landowners to meet their overall stormwater needs and have sites be adopted from an O&M perspective and permit maintenance perspective, there's some more over there, right? So, Christine?
Yeah, I know this is a little bit outside of the ask, but I also think that there's a larger conversation that was also kind of being had in the background through the different testimonies and things, and that's that. Yes, we're looking at phosphorus in Lake Champlain, but we have water quality issues across the state. And although that is a little bit outside of the charge of this committee, that is a statewide need and a benefit back to, all the residents and,
Mhm.
everybody that would be participating in this type of effort.
Yep. Yeah, your comment well taken, Christine. I'm always sort of thinking in my head, I'm always thinking about like the TMDL, the load allocations, the waste load, the reductions. So point taken that, folks are here from all the way down in Brattleboro for a reason, right? So Jenny?
Also, just to build on what Christine is saying, it's not just phosphorus. I mean, so it's not just Lake Champlain, but it's also, there are other contaminants that are included within stormwater that the creation of a utility would reduce and benefit water quality.
Okay. Carrie, go ahead. You are muted.
Sorry about that. In our library, we have some references to the state's periodic review of offsets and the value of that strategy. And dating back to the 1990s when we, we piloted a couple of trading programs with municipalities, and the result was failure to meet our objectives, pollutant reduction objectives there. Then we looked at other trading offset opportunities, and there's a report on that, recognizing that two important points. One is that you need to obviously match the offset with where you have the impact as close as possible. And so I flagged that again, why watershed-based approaches make sense, but it is an accounting need there to look at. The other thing is there's a fundamental element to the TMDL that recognizes, and I use that TMDL, I know we've made important points about our clean water needs statewide, but at least in this context of where we have large TMDLs to address our impaired waters, there is this overarching concern that we have such an important lift across all sectors, and that to achieve our objectives, really, it requires everyone at the table to pull their weight. In other words, there's not much to trade off. And especially if in 20 years or in a particular time frame we're not successful at meeting our pollutant reduction goals, we're back at everyone needs to do more. And then worse than that, if we fail to meet the traditional regulated approaches, or this context of looking at across all sectors, the outcome is that we have to require more reductions from our point sources. And so I'm raising this because there's a cautionary, we should just take care that a simple approach that if we fail to meet our objectives, we can just find offsets. It's not that easy.
Mm-hmm.
Especially when, from that first example I made, when we looked at Shoreham, for example, on we allowed offsets from meeting their point source discharges or requirements, and the offsets failed. And so I raise that because I think we just need to really take care on what our expectations, be mindful, in other words, of how to establish the right monitoring program or expand existing data evaluation programs to track our progress, so that we're not just end up being a delay tactic in meeting our reductions, and it's only going to be that much more costly down the road.
Yeah. True. Jenny, go ahead. And I just want to welcome Senator Harrison. Wendy, hi.
Hi, sorry, I'm late.
Oh,
I'd
no,
have
no
to
worries.
be.
No, you're just on time for the agenda anyway. Perfect. Jenny, go ahead.
Yes, thank you. And just briefly, and not to in any way contradict what Carrie just said, because I do agree with it, but I do, maybe it's the pie in the sky view. The idea that maybe our search for equity has been driven by some of the public comment that we've heard might enable us to find some additional reductions that might not be found just because they lurk just beyond the 3-acre threshold, but that actually might be more cost effective than strict adherence to the 3-acre as it's been defined, and that they would not otherwise, those particular reductions would not otherwise come in through voluntary programs. So it may be that there's some additional reductions to be found, though I don't disagree with anything that Carrie said about the overall tightness of the budget.
I catch the nuance you are laying down.
Thank you.
All right. Well, are there any other thoughts on the scenario 5 model? Christine?
I would like to just hear a little bit more from Catherine about the RPC, her perspective. Not to put it back on you, but you kind of heard some of our comments, and so if you had anything more, I'd be curious to hear that.
Honestly, I'm still kind of digesting it all, but and I haven't had an opportunity to talk with any of my colleagues about their thoughts on this approach. I think if the policymakers determine that a regional utility is best, then it does make sense for the RPCs to be the entity considered in that role, because we do have a relationship with our communities. We can organize our work based on the watersheds, even when they don't necessarily reflect the RPC boundaries. I do have some questions about this ongoing permitting requirement, because RPCs are not permitters right now. And this would certainly add a level of regulatory authority that we don't currently have. And so I think we would really need to think about that carefully.
Mhm.
But I do think generally it makes sense to rely on existing entities rather than to create a new single purpose special governmental entity, because we already have a lot of those in Vermont. We don't need more. So in general, I think it makes sense if this is the approach that policymakers think makes sense.
Thank you.
I have a follow-up question.
Yeah, yep, go ahead.
So I appreciate the point about the permitting authority. And you've mentioned, I believe, earlier this idea or some support for a state level program utility kind of set up. Would it be worth some thought about if going into the state level, if the state couldn't then work with the regional planning commissions through some kind of agreement or some kind of program set up, so that, because the state already does carry out permits, right? I mean, they're already a delegated authority. So I guess I'm just planting that seed, something to think about. Maybe is, could there be an agreement between those two entities? I'm sure something already exists along those lines, right? And then likewise working down to the local level, because you have relationships on both sides.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's definitely, I hope that's considered in one of those extra models in the chapter that was talked about earlier, where the RPC serves some of those functions on the regional level, but it's through delegation from a statewide effort rather than the 11 regional efforts. So I think that approach does have some merit, and there's definitely models that exist right now. The CRISP being one of them, actually.
Right. Right. Jenny.
So just quickly, and I know we want to move to the next agenda item, I will say I really appreciate this model, and I appreciate the way the model has taken into consideration all of the nuances of the discussion, both that we've had as a committee and also in the responses to the straw poll. And seeing this model does make me personally feel more comfortable with the idea of having a single model that we recommend to the legislature, just because it does build in opportunities for negotiation among parties, for variation among how the model plays out in different regions. So I appreciate that.
Thanks, Jenny.
Okay. All right, shall we pivot to our next agenda item then? I will answer my question in the affirmative. Senator Harrison, welcome. I know you are very busy with a lot of things going on down in the building right now. So thanks for taking time to come up with us. And
Of course.
I'll just set the table for you by noting that I had the opportunity to visit with your committee probably 2 weeks ago when the language we're going to talk about now was introduced into the Capitol bill. And I had the, chance to just come down and educate your members in your committee a little bit, Senate institutions, about the role of this committee developing regional stormwater utilities. So with that, do you want to go ahead and take it away? And I think you'll find a kindred audience here for what you're trying to accomplish.
Sure. And I guess what the language is basically what I've been trying to communicate the whole time that I've been in these meetings. I wish I had time to look at the fifth option, because I haven't, and it may be maybe something that I could get behind, but so you all have seen the language. It's pretty straightforward, right? I mean, do you want me to tell you more?
No, there we go. Yeah, we got it on the screen.
Yeah. To the basic point of this is that I feel very strongly that stormwater utilities are fundamentally appropriate at the local level, at the level where roads are. Sorry, I'm just super tired. Where roads are maintained, ditches, culverts, all those things that towns have been doing since they started being towns. And honestly, folks did it before there were towns, right? I mean, taking care of stormwater is what you do at a local level. And one of my main concerns about a regional utility is that it would divert funding from the locals, and I can't see a way that a regional would do everything that a town does. I mean, it just would be really unreasonable expectation to have a regional entity come and take care of the you know what I'm talking about with the dirt roads, the grading of the roads. I mean, a regional utility can't grade all of the dirt roads in Vermont. I don't see that as being reasonable. And different towns have different ideas of how things should be too. I mean, towns don't maintain roads in different, towns in different areas don't maintain roads the same way, and that's a choice. It's not just because they don't want to spend the money, but it's a choice. Like, I mean, Halifax is really different than Marlborough, and they both have dirt roads, and but you can tell the difference when you drive from one into the other. So I think that should be a town choice. I'm very much I'm a local government person. That's what I've been doing for 30 years. And I see immense value in local control. Of course, there are things that should be done regionally, and I believe in state government. And there's just appropriate roles for each level of government. And for me, the most responsive is local, because people are there, and we have town meeting, and it's just super special that Vermont has this ability. I've worked in Florida. Florida actually does wastewater and stormwater really well. I worked in Philadelphia. Philadelphia does stormwater and wastewater really well. Actually, their plants are amazing. But but with stormwater in Vermont, Colchester has a really good website, and on their website they say they're the part of the website that deals with stormwater utilities. It says we've been doing stormwater since 1793 or something, and they have, and so it's not partisan. It's just something that needs to be done, and I really like the idea of the philosophy behind a stormwater utility where you pay if you are consuming it. That's why it can be a utility and not a tax, right? It's because there's a nexus between the service that you get versus what you pay, and there's a built-in incentive to pay less and generate stormwater off the property. Less stormwater should lead to less of a lower fee. So I think that's really important. And it's just important that people understand what they're paying for too. I mean, that's part of a good local government, in my opinion, and a state government, is that people understand the reason behind the fees and the taxes, so that they're just more supportive. I mean, we need government to be transparent and something that is, not hurting us, which that's another conversation. So I've just been trying to figure out how a regional utility would do everything that a local utility could do, because if you regionalize it, then it doesn't work to have a local. It doesn't, to me, and maybe you guys have thought of something, but having a local utility, it would like, think about an electric utility. It has an area. If you expected part of that electric utility to generate its own power because it's a higher density area, that just wouldn't make sense. So I just really am alarmed at the idea of not being able to do stormwater utilities at a local level, and the towns that I've talked to that have them would not want to lose them. So please,
I'm really having a hard time tying like road maintenance
with stormwater utility
to the stormwater utility.
Okay.
I mean, I get there's the municipal roads general permit, but like there's 14 actual stormwater utilities in the state right now. Most of the work that, and I have one in my community, although I'm not here representing that Williston, there is so much work that goes on outside of, like, a very small funding goes towards regrading it, and only the sections of the road that are hydrologically connected are actually eligible. So it's really a small amount. So I don't think that regionalizing anything would necessarily take any local control away. I think that where the regional utility comes into play is more in these actual stormwater treatment practices on developed lands. I see it more not in the public sector of things.
I could definitely see a regional entity for sure, but I would call it something else. I would not call it a utility. I would call it, like a water management district or something. Totally. No,
Sure.
There's a lot of things that you can do regionally, and ditches to me that are next to roads are.
We wouldn't want to surrender that either. I mean, I run the highway department.
Yeah.
I would not want somebody else coming in and doing our ditches.
Yeah.
But I don't see the ditches as necessarily part of the stormwater utility. Again.
Oh, that's interesting. Okay.
That's road maintenance.
Well.
We have to do it in order to keep our roads from. There's a lot of reasons why you ditch a road. The last one is really because you're trying to manage stormwater. The ditch is there to support the structural integrity of the road, to get the water away from the road, so
Right.
the road doesn't get too soft and just totally wash out.
Right.
The idea of like putting any kind of, and again, this is why the MRGP really focuses on the hydrologically connected segments and not the entire length of road.
Right, which makes a lot of sense when you're looking at financial resources. You need to have some limits, but I consider ditches as stormwater. I mean, they're managing stormwater. So
I hear that, but that's not what they're there for.
Well, if it doesn't
So
rain,
let me jump in.
but
Christine, you and I may differ a little bit that I do view the role of a ditch is to move water off of a road.
Yes, move it
But
off of it, but not to treat stormwater. Stormwater treatment for managing pollutant loads versus moving stormwater away from the road for structural integrity of the road, I see are two different things.
Okay, fair enough.
Yeah,
But
okay.
I just wanted to offer the senator that we didn't invite you to sort of engage in sort of a dialogue around actual road management, because the purview of the committee is more about, as Christine noted, stormwater management on sort of the residually designated properties in developed lands. And so that's kind of where we're struggling, because that gets quite expensive. And so that's why the concept of the regional utilities. So and I would not want to get in the way of both of you having a robust and bright dialogue around this, but
No, and I hope
maybe
we have more conversations.
Likewise, thank you.
offer an opportunity for other members, though, to ask any questions, or for you to just, if there's anything else you want to say about it. Fundamentally,
I'm good. I'm fine. But
your
yeah,
language,
questions would be great.
go ahead, Jenny.
So Senator, thank you for being here. Jenny Patterson from the Lake Champlain Committee. I appreciate the opportunity, particularly to be looking at this language again today in view of the conversation that the committee has been engaging in today, because I think for myself, one of the central dynamics and concerns that I have is you don't want to take away local control. And really, my hope would be that what this committee ends up recommending is something that creates more options for communities to choose from. And I think that's what my straw poll answers reflect. And I think we've been talking about today during the discussion is if we can have an entity that is operating at a regional level, that is empowered to provide financial incentives, that would be part of the statute that sets up this new option, so that it becomes attractive for communities to want to engage either in creating their own entity or, engaging through the regional entity. And that was part of what I was applauding in this Model 5, is that it creates the ability for example, an existing community that has an MS4 to decide how it wants to engage with that regional entity. And similarly, for a smaller community to decide, does it really have the wherewithal to be engaging on stormwater, or does it want to choose voluntarily to say, look, we would love to have somebody managing stormwater. So I don't necessarily see a tension more than I think that your amendment really encapsulates some of the conversations that we've been having.
And I don't mean to suggest that all towns are appropriate to have stormwater utilities. I think there's maybe between 15 and 20, 10 to 15 towns in the state that do not have them, that where it might be appropriate. I mean, you need density and people and staff. So I don't at all mean that I'm not assuming that, but for the ones who want to do it and could do it, I don't want them to be not permitted or not allowed or not able to functionally. But
Right.
yes, towns could join together or go to the other entity could provide very similar services. And the watersheds, I mean, we have those, legislature put in a bunch of money and a bunch of people for the river corridors. Have you all talked about that at all, or
River corridors? We're
Yeah.
trying to keep within the part of the
Within,
TMDL
right.
that deals with developed lands. So
as opposed to undeveloped? And
Yes.
so this is really the 3-acre rule and how to get funding for 3-acre.
the statutory charge of the committee is to look at the requirements for 3-acre and to think about achieving those in a different way, including the possibility of parsing the reductions associated with those parcels at a regional basis to a broader array of sites.
Okay.
Carrie, your hand is up. Go ahead.
Thank you. And it's great to see you, Senator. And I appreciate you identifying your concerns. I am on this committee representing small towns. and more voices and understanding the needs of our municipalities is important. I do want to just underline what what Neil had just talked about. Our focus is very constrained, looking at that part of our restoration work, addressing stormwater runoff coming from under-regulated or non-regulated larger parcels that are 3 acres or larger. But I do want to also point out something that was talked about earlier, where our task is also looking at incentives to address the opportunities before us. And finally, it's interesting where there's we have a library of documents, and one of them does every 1 or 2 years surveys nationally how many stormwater utilities there are. And nationally, I think we're at 2,700 around the country. And the smaller ones are even under 50. Municipalities that are under 50 people living in that town. What drives it? The runoff coming of unregulated parking lots, you could say, and yet they get captured because of the magnitude of impact coming from these sites. And so it's not necessarily the size, although I do represent the small town. So I particularly are interested in capacity of small towns, but it is about impact and how do we restore our waters. We all enjoy them. We all want them clean. But how do we do that effectively, efficiently, in partnership with municipalities and important partners such as our regional partners, and potentially using incentives to enhance our capacity through a regional partnership? And what would that look like?
Great. Thank you.
All right. We are close to the end of our agenda here. I do want to leave time if there is any final public comment as a result of this. Are there any last questions for Senator Harrison? I have one for you. What's the poll? When are we going to adjourn?
What?
He wants to know. When is the legislature?
Oh, probably next week.
All right.
But
All right.
it's quality, not quantity, right?
Absolutely. I live by that. Very good. Well, thank you. Thanks for coming to join us, and thanks for also, doing what you do down there right now, because it's getting, this is the time of year where things get tense and lots is happening all at once. So.
Yep.
Great.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. All right, Gianna, let me turn it over to you to just sort of take the temperature of next steps on our scenario.
Sure. So I think we don't have a lot of weeks between now and our next pre-scheduled meeting. The internal team has identified taking maybe some sections of our pre-existing outlined chapters and trying to get some prose on paper. Probably not the full of those chapters. I think what those chapters are maybe turning into now is the other a la cartes. So we've got this model might kind of morph into a chapter in its own, where we articulate the model, we articulate some, throw some lenses on it about equity and cost effectiveness, like how or why this does or doesn't achieve that based on the charge, and then the accompanying statutory changes that would need to be happening there. And then these other pre-existing outlines that we have for Chapter 1 entity type, Chapter 2 permitting, Chapter 3 revenue raising, we're thinking now will be sort of the places to articulate the other ways you could revenue raise, the other ways the permitting dynamic would work. So we're going to try and at least make a little bit of progress in each of those and or the model chapter. I think we've only got 3 weeks, and we'd like to give you a week of review in between that. So I'm not making big promises, but our goal is to put some pros on paper for some of the stuff we've already worked with the work groups on. And then the other thing to flag for you all is, as we've been listening to all of this dialogue, what is also coming to be clear is a longer and longer intro chapter that is capturing more and more of some of these There's more echo again, Danny. Would you mind just muting the room for a second? More and more some of these like other considerations, weather, this, for example, a whole section on weather, this really is the main recommendation of the committee. This is a model for how a regional entity could work. And the intro would articulate like, is the juice worth the squeeze? We're still sort of housing in the intro a section about what the opportunities are if we focus on developed lands. So we talked about that scenario too, still working with some folks to put numbers to that. Giving a history of how the state's explored stormwater utilities. And so that chapter is getting longer and longer, and we haven't really brought that to you. So we might bring an outline to you in the next meeting as well to start to think about like, how do we capture these other ideas about like, okay, maybe not a full regional entity, but incentives with our like pulling those incentive structures or other ways to lower the burden on developed lands, whether that be sort of like upsizing treatment where it's possible on those large Walmart parking lots, looking at other parts of the waste load allocation where there might be flexibility to take on some of that load. So anyway, there's a lot of doggy ears there. And so we'll hope to maybe bring some of that outline to you as well. How does that sound? How does that land with the committee for next steps? Thumbs up. Great.
I see thumbs up from a couple of members. I saw your hand pop up. Carrie, did you want to say anything?
Yes, I appreciate the hard work that you all did in evaluating our approaches and trying to come up with a scenario that kind of meets some expectation, everyone's expectation. So thank you for this hard work. I do want to mention we've had, I think, a robust dialogue today, as in our prior meetings, and to the extent we can start thinking about some of those points we discussed, such as incentive-based, for example, piloting, expansion of existing, using incentives to expand existing municipals into more regional to accommodate other municipalities' needs, those sorts of things in this context. So just something I wanted to just flag. This is a great baseline for us to kind of build upon. So
Yep.
Thank you.
Thank you, Carrie. Yeah, I feel like we have something that's kind of a consensus starting point now that we can, agree to agree with, agree to disagree with, torpedo and build some other mechanisms into it. But we've got a nucleus now, and that represents progress. So that's good. Team, you feel you'll be able to produce some of this material we have 3 weeks between now and the next committee meeting? I'm mindful that we're getting into summer and we want to capitalize on our time so we don't come into fall and have to do a big long race. I'm also mindful that there may come a point in time, I'm not sure if we're there yet, where we want to take some more complete direction from the committee, take maybe a 1-month pause from our regular meetings and have you guys have some extended time to do some work. Maybe we should have that on the agenda for next time, for when we meet in 3 or so weeks with the materials that are produced between now and then. Gianna, what do you think on that?
I think that would be great, Neil, and particularly what Carrie was speaking to and what I was speaking to, this like very rapidly rising outline of a chapter 1 or an intro.
Yeah.
That would appreciate some more direction maybe, but then from there, having a bit of a break in time to focus on the writing would be helpful.
Okay. Well, I'll propose to the committee that we think about that and talk about that at the next meeting. And at some point, someone's got to put concerted time with a pen or a computer keyboard on some paper, and that's the folks on the left side of the room as I see them. So we want to give them the time for that. Otherwise, any last comments or thoughts? Oh, I did. Is there anybody that would like to provide any comment at this time? Any public comment? Okay. In that case, any last bits and parts from members? And thank you for your time. Enjoy. Oh, Carrie, you just came in under the gavel. I don't really have one, but
Just letting everyone know I'm getting a puppy today.
oh no, really? Where?
Anyway, just thought a
Well,
little humor
A little
and
rescue?
a smile on everyone's face, but
A little rescue dog?
yeah, so
Uh-oh.
anyway, I just thought that
All
would
right.
kind of
Next time
liven
we meet,
the day.
you have doggy in hand like that. All right. So we get to see. All right. Everybody have a great day. Thank you so much for your time.
Take care.
Thank you.
I have one